video, we'll go over some of the risks in a vague attempt at hierarchy of having a psychedelic experience, of using psychedelic plants, for example, to alter one's consciousness. So the number one risk, ironically, is, for example, as an American, the US government. The US government can steal all your things, put you in prison for numbers of years, can break up and traumatize your family, can set up your kids with a low self-esteem issue, as often happens when absent fathers are forcibly absent, can induce shame, dad's in prison, right? And so probably number one threat, the US government in direct physical violence, in terms of we're going to grab you and take you and lock you up in a cell. This is also the biggest harm to the cult or culture itself, because to spend $1 million of public money taking a taxpayer out of circulation, which is, more hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you're spending tax money rather than contributing to tax money. This is the way to ruin a country. And it also, of course, any sane person looking at it understands that this is sociopathic and insane, so you deteriorate the trust in the system and the government, because the whole premise of a democracy is we're going to steal your money at X rate, and we're going to sanction that, but we're going to do it for your own good. And so when you observe a government, in any instance, doing more harm than good and spending lots of money in the process, there is an intelligent eroding in trust as one reassesses the competence of the governing power. So first threat. Second threat is that set and setting, including expectation and projection, have a big impact on any new psychological experience. And the fact that the government has, in a number of cases, forged science, bribed scientists to come up, to basically poison animals, and then use poison to poison the animals, and then show the results and say, this is your brain on acid or something like that. Those messages reverberate throughout the cult, and they're part of the set and setting. Your whole life could be ruined, you could be shamed, you could be a criminal, and your whole body could be destroyed. You could go insane, right? So this is the next danger, then, of your friendly government, is, destroying the neutrality of the experience, right? And letting it be something unique and real to you. The third risk is also government-generated, which has to do with the quality of the material. For example, aspirin, to my knowledge, has never caused fatalities because arsenic was mixed into the aspirin supply, or it was too much lead, right? And it was never inspected, right? So legal substances get regularly tested by people competent in the field, number one. Also, legal enterprises tend to attract the best people, right? Meaning, if you can get a job anywhere because you're the best, do you prefer to get a job somewhere where you could be traumatized and have your family ruined because the government didn't agree with your choices in life? Or do you prefer to get a job at a top Ivy League lab making something that the government decides they want, right? Well, most of the best people are going to work in an area where they don't have to work under the difficulties of an entire government aimed at destroying their lives. So This results in a lower level of reliability for black market substances than open market substances, right? So it's another instance of the government pretending to be acting in people's interest. It's much like prostitution, right? They pretend that they care about women, but women are safer in a legalized free market with reviews, with where the women can call the police, etc. So it's the same with psychedelics, right? If you can go to jail for owning a pill, you can't call anyone and say, I've got this pill, I think it's poisonous, because your friendly government will arrest you for providing a public service, and the lab can't be tested anyway. So it's another malfunction. So the third biggest risk around psychoactive compounds is that there is no clear trail that is completely transparent, and there is no objective independent testing agency to maintain public safety by maintaining quality standards. So you may get something that you think is MDMA, or you think is psilocybin, or you think is DMT, or whatever it is, it's just powder, right? You may get something, and it's not what it is. The mushroom was dipped in this thing, or they spilled, they spilled acid on the mushroom, and they didn't realize it, or just thought, well, it looks fine. They didn't understand the implication. So this is another threat by making any substance illegal. There's many, many downsides to the whole idea of restricting people's freedom to put things in their body in a responsible way. Now, the fourth issue comes from a dearth of research, right? The government has been lying to people for so long about all, that your whole life will be ruined, and that's why we're going to ruin your life for you, right? We're going to take $1 million of public money and lock you up, etc., because your whole life is going to be ruined by taking these medicinal plants that have been used by thousands of cultures throughout history. And so you can't trust the government. But at the same time, when you have extremists arguing that everything's bad, it tends to create extremism on the other side. Right? The truth is that everything is good in some situations some of the time, and everything is bad, at least for a given person, in some situations some of the time. And dose often matters, set and setting. It's a very complex algorithm, but just like a hammer, you can use it to kill yourself, or you can use it to build a house. There is, most things are neutral. People who win the lottery, for example, which is supposedly a great event, usually end up more miserable in all kinds of ways that they didn't imagine in a cult that equates value with money and says that all you need to do is make lots of money and then you'll be a successful person, right? And so anything is very nuanced and is a neutral probability field that leans towards being good if used in this way, right? And the same is true of psychedelics. However, the government basically is saying these are such horrible things that, in Richard Nixon's world, Timothy Leary is the most dangerous man in the country, not Richard Nixon, who's burning women and children alive in Vietnam, right? So, then that tends to create a counter-narrative, which are that, if only everyone was high on acid, all the world problems would be solved. We would just love each other and all that. And that's kind of a lie to balance out the lie. But the truth is in the middle, right? There's some people that go insane. There's some people whose schizophrenia is accelerated. There's many people whose marriages are saved, but it's not, all easy. There's a lot of nuance. And just like a hammer, maybe 95% of the time when you use it for hammering these types of nails, if you are building the right structure, right, then it's a good thing. And, 90% of the time when you use it in this setting for these reasons with, all of this ramifications, it's a bad thing, right? So a lack of education, a lack of informed population, right, is the biggest, is a big threat. Now, this ties in with another threat, which is cultural chauvinism. Now, cultural chauvinism elevates masculine traits and masculine faces of reality and sublimates and kind of patronizes feminine traits and feminine faces of reality. And in that particular paradigm, the outer world is considered really important, the big deal, right? So, if you scarred someone's face, for example, this would be a really big deal, right? You've scarred them for life, This is a big deal because everyone can see it in a cult that obsesses about appearance. But if you scar someone's self-esteem that lasts a lifetime 3 times more, a chauvinistic cult will discount that. Get over it. Big deal, right? You scar a woman's face and, you've ruined her life, but you scar a man's self-esteem, which is the inner world, the feminine face of reality. Well, if he was a real man, he'd get over it, right? The chauvinistic approach. Now, this general diminishment of the importance and relevance of the psyche and of the inner world has resulted in systemic psychological illiteracy, traumatic illiteracy, relational illiteracy, emotional illiteracy. Most people cannot tell, for example, the most basic question: how do you dissolve hate and turn it into confidence? Or how do you turn confidence into hate? Those are 2 states. Most people, it's never even occurred to them. Well, it's a very important question, by the way. But in a psychologically illiterate cult, everyone has agreed as good cult members not to take emotions and relationships highly seriously and not to study the science. And instead to, let it be superstitious, stuff like I have a feeling of this and I have a feeling of that. As long as it's not studied seriously and scientifically, it's fine, right? That's just that other domain that isn't as important, so we don't have to study it scientifically. So that's the attitude. Now, the trouble is that psychologically illiterate people are not aware, because they're psychologically illiterate, of exactly how vast the psyche is, how important it is, how fundamental it is, right? That whatever it is that the cult says is so important on the outside, it's not as important as psychological architecture, right? Because without the psyche, you don't have skyscrapers, you don't have hedge funds, you don't have whatever it is you're into, fast cars, right? All of that came from inside human beings. It first was inside a human being, and then it was externalized, right? This necklace, this camera setup, the internet, TV, food, McDonald's, whatever it is you think is so important and real, it began on the inside. Ants didn't create Lamborghinis, right? It began on the inside of human beings and it came out. But this is a bit fuzzy, right? We're a bit too dumb to really grasp this as a cult, as a culture. And so the idea of, taking a compound that changes the psyche, that changes the perception of reality, is taken as, rather interesting, but a little fun. What? I wonder what, I'd like to see some fun colors. Here, hit me up. I don't know where it came from. I don't know the dose. I don't know my traumatic history. I don't know about integration. I haven't looked at all the people who have misstepped and done this. I don't know any of this, but it's only something dealing with feminine terrain. So it couldn't be that important, right? Or I would have learned about it, right, in my high school that doesn't teach me any useful skills for life. I would have surely understood something about, that this was important, right? So as a result, many people take it in a poor setting with poor hydration, with poor safety, without a safe person, without someone who's going to see that they get safely home over the next 10 hours, without any awareness of counterindications for, different substances or alcohol or whatever it is. And so, the chauvinism leads many fools, foolishly, into assuming that they know much more than they do and finding themselves in waters they never had the humility to imagine that they existed. So you find yourself now out of control because the ego has been marginalized in its influence. And now you're out of control in a domain that you lacked the humility to anticipate. You were so arrogant about the world being the way the world is, the way the cult has trained your mind to see it, that when you start seeing things that you've never seen before, you don't have any confidence because you haven't had any experience. You rapidly realize that you were a fool, which is alarming because now you've got to rely on that fool to figure this stuff out, right? So this is a huge blind spot, right? And so as you start to experience things that you never imagined were possible, let alone that you would be experiencing them, an ego, a thought structure that is poorly informed, paranoid by cult brainwashing, and unsupported by poorly informed, paranoid cult members. You're having to figure this out. This is a huge kind of arithmetic problem to unload onto a poorly trained conscious mind. And yet that is the attitude with which many Westerners will stumble into this terrain. Unlike a trained shaman, unlike someone on a meditation path or part of a rich history that, for example, in ancient Greece, with the Eleusinian mysteries, this was a ritual of elders, and it was choreographed by people who knew what they were doing and had a lot of experience in these domains. And so it had a very, very positive impact on people like Plato and Aristotle, etc. And because they had the set and setting, they had the support, they had the awareness to have these experiences and let them be transcendent. So this is a huge arena. And it's for this reason I encourage you to spend no less than 100 hours, 97 hours minimum, right? On all kinds of things like this that will explore the probability field in different things. The probability field, if you have PTSD, see, there's lots of different patterns. And the trouble with a fragmented cult that looks at things as particles rather than ecologies is that it'll study one thing and then think that's it, right? But it's never it. It's never it, right? For example, do you know what your attachment pattern is? That'll have influence. Do you know if you have unresolved trauma, PTSD, or complex PTSD? That'll have a lot of influence. Do you know at what point on the trauma continuum are you dissociative? Are you deeply dissociative? Or are you up in fight and flight still working on it? Do you know where you are on that map? What is your sense of survival and security and your confidence of survival and security in your outer world? How knowledgeable, do you have any real friends? Do you have any guides and resources if things go into deeper water, right? Every one of these things will have impact. And then, are you taking any medications? Does the compound you're taking enhance, synergize, neutral, or create a dangerous side effect when this and this is combined, right? Do you know, right? Right? Here, try one of these. It feels good. At a party, dehydrated, with alcohol. So an incredibly, arrogant and ignorant person, which is both, right? Because someone that goes into something quite fine, not knowing anything at all about it, there's a little bit of arrogance and a lot of ignorance. So this is a big terrain of threat. The fact that it can backfire if you're experiencing psychedelics, et cetera, without any of this awareness, and et cetera, then puts you into another huge area of threat, which is almost no one around you is going to have the competence to help you solve what you don't have the competence to solve, right? So now you're in a new threat. That can damage relationships because you can be in a place where you really, really need competent help. And instead, this person, knowingly or unknowingly, does something to hurt you more, and that relationship is fried. And this person doesn't know what they're doing and refuses to help, and the trust is broken, right? So you can actually end up, quickly losing other parts of your reality that you need at the very point you need extra support. You could need time to integrate, et cetera, and end up losing a job because you didn't know you'd have that experience, and so you didn't know you would need time to integrate it, and you don't know how to integrate it, so you didn't know you'd need time to learn how to integrate it, and meanwhile, a client is dissatisfied and you're fired. And the person firing you doesn't have a clue and is in a capitalist framework has no interest in any other variable other than that you cost the company some money at that moment. So that's a whole issue. There's also, in the same cult that has raised all of this, there are plenty of therapists who are unlicensed and don't know what they're doing and don't know that they don't know what they're doing because they haven't yet experienced a combination like yours. And they don't know that they don't know how to deal with that combination until your combination of situations comes up and suddenly they don't and can't and won't deal with it, right? Now you've got a situation where they're afraid, and so they can deal with it even less. Because they're afraid, they're more sociopathic, right? And so this can deteriorate in various ways. So then there's the question of the dose, right? You can have too much. It's less of an issue to have too little, but you can have too much of a dose so that things come faster. This is the same question in a car, right? In cults that had a phobia against cars, they would be pointing out, cars are dangerous, they crash all the time. But, you understand that if you put the accelerator on too fast relative to the environment, you hit the car in front of you. If you put the brake on too fast relative to the speed and stuff, the car behind you hits you. We're talking about dose, right? And because it's less controllable, right? It's a substance that overrides the part of the brain that makes decisions on these things. That's, the whole point. Getting the dose right is important. And again, when batches are coming and not tested, one I took one pill and then I took one pill. Yes, but one pill came from this lab with an extra strong batch, and one pill came from this lab with an extra weak batch. And and in one situation, you drank a bunch of lime juice and had an empty stomach. On the other hand, you just had 3 hamburgers. And the effect was very different, right? And you didn't have the humility to anticipate that. And so you're shocked and out of your depth, right? Like a car going too fast into the car in front of it, or too slow, and we haven't had enough training. So I think these cover most of the issues, and most of these issues can be resolved with a conscious effort to triple your humility, your awareness that there are many things you don't know that you don't know, and your willingness and interest in learning more of them. Now that can lead to some good readings and books, and that will expand your sense of what happened for these people, right? But it's never going to cover the entire territory. You can mitigate the dose thing by trying a very tiny amount and seeing how it affects you, and then trying and simulate, repeating that and not changing all the variables at once, right? So if I tried a tiny amount on an empty stomach, try the slightly larger amount or whatever on the same empty stomach, with having eaten, similar stuff and in a similar setting, so that you can see how much the dose of something is affecting you. How long does it last? How much time do you need to integrate after the fact? You can do research on the combinations. There's some beautiful websites on drug combinations and how they do and don't affect one another, and is it synergistic, etc. So you can look at that. You can plan out, not to take something that has a 10-hour lifespan 4 hours before an important meeting, right? So you can look at all those things. You can look at bad trips. That's a good field to understand. And when people finally figure out what went wrong, outlining and understanding that. You can find people who have had not just lots of experience, but lots of well-rated experience. Now, this is tough. Your government is blocking that public knowledge, but more and more places are showing that type of thing. And the third wave is a website focused on pretty science-based, a lot of science-based studies on different psychedelics, etc. So it's a good resource for potential practitioners. And so good luck.